Well, thank you for joining us for this edition of the Gun Owners News Hour. Today, it's a real pleasure to have back with me a wonderful guest, Dr. Linda Lagemann, who's for well over 2 decades been practicing psychology in San Francisco. Hopefully is going to be, during this coming calendar year, moving to Washington, where she can become an advocate for some of the things that she strongly thinks need to be addressed. We're going to start with just a brief recap so that everybody hopefully is on the same page. Dr. Lagemann, we've got psychiatry, which does one thing, it has one kind of an approach, and we've got psychology, which has another. Why don't you just lay out, make sure everybody is aware that there are real distinctions between the two practices?
Oh, sure. Psychology is talk therapy, and this is the basic difference. And psychiatry is medications. That's generally, a psychiatrist is an MD and trained in various drugs that are mind altering, and psychology is different theories of the mind and why we're the way we are. Now, some of, the reason I left my practice, I had a private practice for over 23 years and closed that last summer, because of seeing how damaging actually the mental health field has become, even within psychology, because psychology has turned into a referral source for psychiatry. There's so much influence from the pharmaceutical industry in the entire field now. And so many people that I saw who came into my practice, regular people with regular life problems, coming in already on a psychiatric drug. And then I started doing research, and for the last 3 years now I've been researching the issues, and the stats keep going up, and now we're up to 1 in 4 Americans on a psychiatric drug.
Now, there's one aspect of this that concerns us, that certainly concerns us, what you've just reported. But at Gun Owners of America, we're also concerned that one person's opinion, be it a psychologist and especially a psychiatrist, can be taken to, in effect, grab somebody's Second Amendment rights right out of his hand, confiscate firearms, and this is without any kind of court hearing where there's an adversarial procedure, and you might have to defend your theory that you applied with your patient against an opposing expert, and that's the iron sharpening iron that's supposed to operate in our adversarial system in the courts, and that's a lot of what we call due process. And we're seeing so many cases where that doesn't happen. Somebody gets a drug prescribed, and voila, that's it.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a serious concern. And when you have the field, the entire field, the mental health field, with all the different diagnoses and all the different labels of people, I don't know if people really know the history of this or realize that they, unlike actual medical practice, all of these diagnoses are not based on science. There are no tests or anything. It's entirely subjective. And so when you have something that is entirely subjective, it's just a group of people voting, actually, and they're voting with conflicts of interest because they have financial ties to the pharmaceutical companies that make the drugs that treat the disorders that they define. That's a whole other thing. But when there's something that isn't based in objective science, that means it's subjective, obviously, and it means it's entirely vulnerable to bias, prejudice, abuse of all kinds, and even just stupidity and variations in opinion. So the power that we have given to psychiatry and psychiatric labels is really shocking and very dangerous because, as you point out, one person can say, oh, you're paranoid schizophrenic, I'm going to say you need to be involuntarily committed, take away all your civil liberties, or this is also being used for decisions about gun ownership.
Indeed, we saw this begin to come on the center stage during the Bush administration, when Congress debated and passed, and unhappily President Bush signed, a measure that we dubbed the Veterans Disarmament Act. It was sort of the precursor to Obamacare. It was taking those medical records, which are supposed to be privileged, and it was using them in the criminal justice system. And so we had, I remember clearly one guy that had called in during this whole, hadn't even become law yet. He said, I went to renew my concealed carry permit, and that was denied. He said, I hadn't been convicted of anything. Nothing changed as far as I knew. And then about 10 days later, I get a knock on the door, and there's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives saying, turn over your guns. I had not been convicted of anything in a court of law. I hadn't so much as raised my voice at anybody, and here they came. And so that, I thought, was a very stark example of how this system can go awry. And it's probably even to a considerable extent, subjective on how this subjective data are used in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, this is something that all rights can be taken away. This is the power we've given to psychiatry, all rights. And this is something Dr. Thomas Szasz, who's a psychiatrist, psychiatrist and a lifelong critic and the conscience of psychiatry, he called this the therapeutic state, and using that term kind of ironically, but the therapeutic state, meaning the alliance between psychiatry and the government to control people. And that's what we're seeing with psychiatry's control in our court system. I mean, deciding who gets to do what, deciding who's going to be locked up in an institution, deciding custody, all kinds of things. And it's all without a shred of science. It's really mind-boggling that we've let that happen without science, and I would also point out, without any cures. We've given so much control to a field that cannot say that they know the cause of any mental or emotional struggle, and they do not have a cure. They have had a history of lots of experimentation on people, from lobotomies to electric shock to now all of the different drugs, with no real knowledge of what they're doing and why, and with more and more damage. One of the things that we now know is with the most popular antidepressants, the SSRI antidepressants, there's even an FDA black box warning about this, and the drug companies know it, that they cause an increase in suicidality and violence and homicide, and we see this in some of these weird killing sprees that are not all the time, by the way, done with guns. But all of them where the records have been released have involved psychiatric drugs that are mind-altering. They're called that for a reason. They do change somebody and make people do things that they would never ordinarily do. And, this is something that we're looking at now.
Thanks for listening to the Gun Owners News Hour today, talking with Dr. Linda Lagemann, a person who has had a clinical practice, a private practice of psychology for well over 2 decades, and has seen a lot of things developing in her field that have concerned her, and they spill over, as you might imagine, since she's a guest on the gun show, that they spill over and have impact on gun owners. We mentioned in the last segment how even a psychiatric diagnosis, probably I think it was at the Veterans Administration, led to the confiscation of a veteran's firearms based on a diagnosis without any day in court, without any attempt by the government to let him rebut that. The government just assumed that the man was guilty and therefore couldn't be trusted with guns. That's a really stunning development in the way the government looks at the people and their powers in the government. I guess let's try to pick up where we were. Mm-hmm. The whole debate, Dr. Lagemann, as you have indicated, needs to be done within the confines of distinguishing between legalization and decriminalization. Have I got that right?
Oh, yeah. So kind of moving into this, we're going to move into looking at the marijuana legalization issue, which is a very important issue. This is 2016 is going to be the very big push to legalize marijuana. And there is just a lot of confusion out there, I think kind of intentional in the media, and extremism. And everything you read, almost, you got to read with a grain of salt. It's one of those kind of things where I think we're being a little bit manipulated and pushed into extremes. But first, I want to just say, why I have an interest in this issue, because normally I focus on the damage of psychiatric drugs and how those do diminish people and disable people. But ultimately, I am vehemently against anything that is attempting to control or oppress people or take away freedoms. And the marijuana issue is one of those, and maybe not in the way that somebody might initially think that I'm talking about it. But I think first we got to look at what we're talking about with marijuana now in terms of changes in potency. I think most people's reference point is thinking of the, Cheech and Chong kind of marijuana, the, natural herb, and that marijuana from the 60s and 70s had less than 1% of THC, the psychoactive substance. And today's marijuana has been manipulated and modified to intensify the THC, where now there's an average of 14% THC content in the marijuana, some as high as 32%. And
what is the desired physical reaction, quote-unquote enjoyment, that somebody experiences from that kind of steroidal marijuana? Do they have less concern about the world? Exactly what seems to be characteristic of the person's thinking once they've used this high-intensity marijuana?
Well, you're going to get, less concern about anything going on. So just everything magnified from what was the old style of marijuana, and less motivation, it doesn't interfere with problem solving and thinking. So it's
kind of like the novel that Aldous Huxley wrote, where I think he called it Soma, which I guess was a reference to dreams, where people were pretty much constantly drugged. They would go to places where they could be intravenously hooked up, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Correct. And then they would do whatever they were expected to do because they didn't want to do anything to stop that good feeling coming, man.
Well, this is where, my concern, like I said, there's a lot to talk about this, but I have two angles on this that concern me. One is the difference in how much impact it has on people, and especially teenagers, because, with legalizing, the target is usually teenagers. When you make an industry, which is the difference between legalizing and decriminalizing. So decriminalization would be, and there are lots of options to decriminalize. That's one, and I think that everybody, I think almost everybody, would want to see some form of decriminalization. Nobody wants to see somebody go to jail for smoking a joint or growing a plant. So it's possible to decriminalize in many different ways. States can make laws, and there's a lot of options there. Legalizing is ushering in a marijuana industry. Legalizing is saying it's okay to manufacture and sell. And that is the industry. There are industry people. There are big money interests behind this push to legalize. It is not some old hippies who want everybody to have a groovy time. It is the Drug Policy Alliance is the biggest backer, and the Drug Policy Alliance has as board members people like George Soros. He's actually a former director. One of his top 5 investment holdings is Monsanto. Paul Volckner is one of the other board members. These are some of the people that are pushing for and funding the legalization movement.
I find it very concerning that I don't know that much about Volcker, although he's probably kind of a big government sort of guy. And Monsanto, as big agriculture, probably depends on favorable rulings from the Department of Agriculture. So all this is crony capitalism. But Soros is just an open, flat-out communist. The guy is a statist of the first order. And if he's involved in this, it tells me that he probably doesn't imbibe this substance himself. He sees it as a way to get where he wants to go. It's almost as if he's trying to apply Aldous Huxley on us. Right.
That's why I'm concerned. That's the thing. And this is where I think most people, the country is really moving towards legalization. 54%, according to some poll that was done, actually it was a couple of years ago, the poll was done, 54% were favoring legalization. But I don't think people realize what that means. It's not the same as decriminalizing. You don't have to legalize it in order to not throw somebody in jail for having a small amount,
you can make it a parking ticket type of offense and send in your $25 and it's over and done.
Yeah, you make it a fine or something or whatever. But that's right. I got very concerned. It's a major red flag to see George Soros' name there. And the industry, when you make an industry, the money is made on the addicts. This is the same with alcohol. The alcohol industry, they do not make money on the people who drink responsibly. If you have a cocktail before dinner, you have a glass of wine with dinner, they're not making their money on you. They make 80% of the consumption of alcohol happens by 20% of people.
Dr. Lagemann, I'm sorry, I've forgotten to get your, you have a web address or two.
Yeah.
Why don't you give those to folks now so that they can find out more after the show's over?
Sure. Okay, so mine directly is, it's drlagemann.com. That's DRLAGEMANN, drlagemann.com. And then I'm a commissioner for Citizens Commission on Human Rights, it's a mental health watchdog, the oldest and largest international one since 1969. And there's a ton of incredible information. The best research is on that website. It is CCHRINT.org. And that stands for Citizens Commission on Human Rights International.org. The other thing I wanted to let people know was interviewed for a movie that will be coming out in March. It's American Addict 2, and it is all about how we are hooked on all the pharmaceuticals, and it's going to be really good. There's Ron Paul is interviewed in it, and Dennis Kucinich, and some music people and actors, and just a lot of folks talking about the pharmaceutical industry. Its grip on everybody.
Well, I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm glad you mentioned American Addict 2. That sounds like something we should be encouraging people to go see, and we'll try to be diligent about doing that. So
I have the trailers on my website, so people can see the trailers. If they go on my website and click under the media button, there's the trailers are there at the bottom.
So just going to drlagemann.com, LAGEMANN.com, that really is where you can get to all the things we've been talking about. We were talking about this chap, Eric Garner, whose name I couldn't quite get out before the break. Eric Garner was a mountain of a guy, and his extreme overweight had led to a number of serious health problems. He was approached by a New York City cop for and told he was going to be placed under arrest for selling loosies, meaning loose cigarettes, onesies, actually. And evidently people would pay $1 or maybe more, I don't know, a cigarette, because that New York City taxes are so high that many people find it cheaper to buy cigarettes one at a time out on the street. They're a little cheaper if you're buying them from a guy such as Eric Garner was, because he's not paying taxes into the city. And it was actually other merchants with stores that had dropped the dime on Eric Garner, because people were buying their cigarettes, as it were, in that black market where Mr. Garner was operating, instead of coming into their stores. So he was cutting into their profit. And I would say a lot of it traces back to the notion that some things will just tax the brains out of them. And that was a contributing factor, no doubt, to the demise of Mr. Garner. And I think we should point out that we have found many different ways to grow a police state. That cop would have had no interest in paying any attention to Eric Garner if Eric Garner wasn't doing something that would be quite legal in most other jurisdictions in the United States, although he probably wouldn't have any takers, because why should I pay you $1 for a cigarette when I can go and get them for a mere, I don't know, what is it now for a pack of cigarettes, $5, $6, $7? So the economic incentive was a major contributing factor to the demise of Mr. Garner. And I think we shouldn't, we can question the cop's judgment as to whether it's worth police time to actually arrest somebody for selling a cigarette. But be that as it may, the cop was acting within the law. Garner was not. And maybe what we need to do is re-examine some of these laws. And we've been talking about this in related context, that the whole notion that something like marijuana, for example, should be totally illegal leads to situations kind of comparable to what happened to Eric Garner.
Yeah, I think that's right. If it's completely illegal, you've got your problems there, and you've got, you can have police state types of things there. If it's completely legal, where you say, welcome, marijuana industry, put out your vending machines and make commercials that, target our teenagers, that's another problem. But those are not our only two options. There are a whole bunch of options in the decriminalizing range, and actually 18 states, it might be more now. No, I think it's 18 states have decriminalized marijuana. So it is possible to do that, that's a better policy decision, is to decriminalize. And I think that's really what most people, that's more in line with public opinion. And I do think that the public is being intentionally confused with their, when you read things, I'm reading all of this now, and there's often using decriminalize and legalize as synonyms. You'll see it in the same article. So there's making it fuzzy and making it seem like legalizing is the option.
I think maybe it would help, and I think this is a correct distinction. If we are talking about a criminal offense, we're talking about the potential of jail time.
Yes.
If we're talking about an offense like parking, I've never heard of anybody going to jail for parking offenses. Right. There may be one exception, outlier, who's been such a scofflaw. Okay, fine. Yeah. But it's not a jailable offense as a rule.
Right.
And that's really, I think, the distinction, because I can go to jail if they think I'm doing something that's illegal, but not to jail if all I have done was park too long in the same place.
That's exactly the distinction. Decriminalize means you take jail off the table. It is not something that somebody can go to jail for. And that's, I think, what most people are in favor of. And unfortunately, they're being pushed in the direction with that. Then they're being pushed to legalize, which I don't think most people realize what that exactly means in terms of the industry. Even with the states that have legalized medical marijuana, which there are think there might be 23 now that have medical marijuana laws. Let's just take Colorado, where now they've made it entirely legal as of, November 2012, but they didn't open their first pot stores until January 2014 this year. So they've had almost a full year of full legal. But prior to that, they had the medical marijuana. And what we see is when you do make it accessible in whatever form, so medical marijuana, you have a big increase in youth use. It's not legal for teenagers, but once you make it accessible, they can get it. And so Colorado, in 2012, after they had made it medical marijuana legal, their youth from 12 to 17-year-olds, marijuana use went up 39% higher than the national average, just like 3 years after they had made it legal medically. So 39% higher than the national average. So this is exactly what we don't want to have happen. And is it being used by teens with their developing brains, and there are more problems. Teenagers actually do get addicted, and especially with this high-intensity THC marijuana that is what we're talking about now. It's been manipulated to that point. The National Institute of Drug Abuse, I think it was their stats, said that 1 in 6 teenagers who's using marijuana becomes addicted now. And this is, again, different than what people are thinking of from the 60s and 70s pot. This is much higher potency, much more of a vulnerability for teenagers.
And is it much more likely to chill you out a la Aldous Huxley style so that you're just a compliant little drone?
Yes, well, this is where, again, back to like what my major concerns are about what we're doing to the population in various ways. There are a lot of tools that are being used to disable the dissenters, the creators, the leaders, and that's one of them. Now, psychiatric drugs are a very big one, and that's, the main thing I do focus on. But I see now with this high-intensity THC marijuana is another way of doing that, and especially for the new generation of dissenters and leaders that are being, there's just an apathy that goes along with it, and lack of motivation, and it's yes, I think it is. It's just another way of stopping people and holding them down.
When we get back, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Lagemann, about the people that have had some medical relief, apparently, from smoking marijuana, as opposed to the discovery I made just a few days ago about taking cannabis oil, which doesn't involve smoking it. So let's take a look at the pain relief aspect of all of this. Kind of interesting, the whole marijuana issue, the differences that you've pointed to, Dr. Lagemann, between decriminalization and legalization, and quite evidently, apart from the oils, not smoking marijuana, but using oils, which can be used medicinally, even in fighting some cancers, there are some analgesic properties, if that's the right word, some pain-relieving properties of smoking marijuana that are not apparently obtainable from other sources. Did I summarize that correctly?
Well, let's see. There's I want to make the difference between the kinds of marijuana, that the THC versus the CBD, the cannabidiol. So there are about 500 properties in marijuana, about 500 properties in the marijuana plant. We don't know much about most of them. We know the THC, that's the one that is the psychoactive substance that people get high from. Cannabidiol, CBD, you don't get high from, and there is some promising research on medicinal uses of the cannabidiol part. And there are some plants where they have not been bred to or modified. I don't know if they're actually formally genetically modifying if it meets that criteria or not. But anyway, there's some plants where they have not done this intensifying of the THC, and so then you get more of the CBD. And
will
those
you
have been
get some
used.
kind of a mellow feeling from the cannabidiol kind of marijuana?
I don't know that you get a mellow feeling. I think it just has the medicinal property without that, but I don't know for sure on a mellow feeling. I know it's not like something somebody would use to get high. You don't get high from it.
You won't get stoned.
You won't get stoned, no.
Okay.
Now, there are other things, like even THC, if it's uncooked, meaning like not smoked, not made into brownies where you heat it in, where it's unheated. When you heat THC, it changes it, and that's where people get high. There's also research on juicing. So there are people who are taking the regular, marijuana plant that has the THC, but juicing, and that does not get one high either. and that has medicinal properties and is used for a lot of things. There's a group in Mendocino County, it's in California, that and they've started there, and then they've got 5 centers internationally now where they focus on juicing for things like, I think, fibromyalgia and a number of rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of different things. And then, as you brought up, the oil, and that's one of the other things is I think that's mostly the cannabidiol, the oil that's being used for epilepsy. There's some for treating, seizures, like uncontrolled seizures in children. And then certainly there's the appetite issue for people who've had chemo and for AIDS. But all of these do not require getting high. And that too, I think that's been confused in the media with the medical uses that are valid and there's reasons to research those more, but that's different than the marijuana in the store and people smoking it. It's a different kind of thing.
Have we had a long enough experience with any of the states having medical marijuana? Or now, did you say that any of them have completely legalized marijuana or just decriminalized?
Well, no. There are 4 states that have completely legalized it now. So,
and have they experienced a spike in their crime rate?
They've experienced a spike in addiction and in treatment, substance abuse admissions for marijuana, particularly now the highest, the number one reason that teenagers go into substance abuse treatment is marijuana, not alcohol. Prior you would think it would be alcohol. So, and a spike in car accidents.
They're a problem to themselves, but they're not necessarily engaged in crime. Maybe, as you just said, involved in more car accidents. But that's a problem that we could have with alcohol as well. So welcome to the rest of our world, I guess. Yeah.
So there are 4 states that have legalized it outright, and that's Colorado, Washington, Alaska, and Oregon have legalized it. There are 23 states, including D.C., that have medical marijuana legalized, and then there are 18 states, some of those overlap, there are 18 states that have decriminalized it. Now, in terms of medical marijuana use, you brought that up. So the states, like California is one of the states that has medical marijuana. Across the country, less than 5% of the people in the medical marijuana program have glaucoma or cancer or AIDS or, these things that it's to treat. So it really, the medical marijuana is really just used primarily for recreational. Very small percentage that have the medical conditions that it was intended for legally,
Interesting. Now, does that run into the same problems that outright legalization? We do have, then, as you say, an increase in use. It would be an increase in addiction. Do we see automobile accidents connected to it increasing? Probably not violent crime would be my guess, because you tend to mellow out, man, with the marijuana. So you're probably not as likely to have a chip on your shoulder, but you might be a lousy driver. Yeah,
you are a lousy driver, and twice the risk of automobile accidents on smoking the marijuana. That's a study that's quoted a lot. I haven't read that study directly myself, but it is one that it's a British medical journal, 2012 article that, like I said, I see it cited a lot. I just have never tracked down the actual article to read it myself. So it said that marijuana use doubles the risk of car crashes. And that kind of goes along with the statistics out of Colorado, where, we have the experiment.
I guess for further inquiries, folks, you're going to have to go to Dr. Lagemann's site, drlagemann.com, DRLAGEMANN.com. Dr. Lagemann, thanks so much for bringing to the audience this information. I think it's really interesting and very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns. And that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.